The first time Sophie Bennett's mother opened her front door, she looked straight at me and said, "Ethan," like she had known me for years. Not hello. Not "can I help you?" Just my name, spoken soft and certain, the way you'd greet someone who already had a chair waiting for them at your dinner table. I stood there on the porch holding a laptop bag that wasn't mine, completely frozen, because as far as I knew, Sophie Bennett had never once mentioned me to her mother. We weren't dating. We weren't anything. We were co-workers who shared a wall between our cubicles and split the same pot of bad break room coffee. That was it. That was supposed to be it. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 31, and at the time all this happened, I worked as a claims analyst at a mid-sized insurance office in a town small enough that everybody's business traveled faster than the internet could carry it. I wasn't a dramatic guy. I didn't chase attention, didn't start things I couldn't finish, and I definitely didn't go looking for complicated situations with women who came with families, histories, and expectations attached. I liked my life simple. Work, gym, dinner, sleep, repeat, with just enough friends on the weekend to keep from turning into a ghost. Sophie sat 2 desks over from me. She'd been hired about 8 months before any of this started, transferred in from a branch office 2 states away after some kind of restructuring nobody talked about directly. She was sharp, quiet in the way that made you notice her more, not less, and she had this habit of tapping her pen against her coffee mug 3 times before she said anything in a meeting, like she was giving herself permission to speak. I noticed things like that about her. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Co-workers notice things about each other. That's just what happens when you spend 40 hours a week 12 feet apart. We weren't close, not really, not in the beginning. We were polite. We covered each other's phones when one of us needed a bathroom break that stretched a little too long. We complained about the same printer that ate every 3rd page. Small stuff. The kind of stuff that builds a friendship so slowly you don't notice it happening until you're already standing inside it. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Sophie came in looking pale, her eyes red-rimmed, moving slower than usual. By 10 in the morning, she was gripping her desk like the room had started spinning around her. Our supervisor, a tired man named Mr. Patterson who mostly just wanted nobody to make his job harder, took one look at her and told her to go home before she passed out on the carpet and made him fill out an incident report. Sophie argued, because of course she did. She had a presentation due, files that needed to be pulled, numbers that needed to be checked. She kept saying she was fine in a voice that made it obvious she was not fine. I watched her try to stand up twice and sit back down both times. "I've got it," I said, before I'd fully decided to say it. "Whatever you need finished today, I'll finish it. Go home." She looked at me like I'd offered to donate a kidney. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I'm doing it anyway. Go home, Sophie." She went, eventually, after making me repeat back 3 separate instructions about a file she was worried I'd mess up. I didn't mess it up. I finished her report, sent it under her name the way she asked, and by 5 o'clock, I noticed she'd left her laptop bag under her desk in the rush to leave, along with a folder of physical documents she'd specifically told me she needed for a call the next morning. I could have left it. I could have told her to come get it herself, or brought it in the next day and let her scramble through the morning without it. That would have been the easy version of that Tuesday. Instead, I found myself putting her bag in my passenger seat and typing her address into my phone, telling myself the whole drive over that I was just being a decent coworker. Nothing more complicated than that. Her house sat on a quiet street with big maple trees leaning over the sidewalk, the kind of neighborhood where porch lights meant something and everybody still waved at passing cars. I parked, walked up, and knocked twice before I had time to second-guess the whole idea. The door opened, and a woman somewhere in her 50s stood there in an apron dusted with flour, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She had Sophie's same sharp eyes, the same way of studying a person before deciding what to say to them. She looked at me for one long second. Then she smiled like something had finally clicked into place and said my name. Ethan. I stood there holding the laptop bag like it might explain the situation for me. "I'm sorry, have we met?" The woman laughed, a warm, easy sound. "No, we haven't. But I feel like I already know you." She stepped back from the door, waving me inside like it was the most natural thing in the world. Come in, you're letting the cold air in." I didn't move right away. I think there might be some confusion. I'm Ethan. I work with Sophie. I know exactly who you are, she said, still smiling, still holding the door open. I'm Carol. Sophie's mother. Now come in before I catch a chill standing here. I stepped inside because I genuinely didn't know what else to do. The house smelled like cinnamon and something baking, warm in a way that made my own apartment feel like a waiting room by comparison. Carol led me toward the kitchen, talking the entire way like we were resuming a conversation we'd started a long time ago. Sophie's upstairs resting, she said. She'll be glad you came by, though I imagine she'll pretend otherwise for about 30 seconds before she gives up the act. I just came to drop off her bag, I said. She left it at the office. I didn't want her to be stuck without her laptop for the call tomorrow. Carol turned and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something between amusement and quiet satisfaction. That sounds exactly like something you'd do. You keep saying things like you know me, I said carefully. I promise, we've genuinely never met. She waved a hand like that was a technicality not worth arguing over. Sophie talks about you, Ethan. More than she probably realizes she does. She set 2 mugs down on the counter without asking if I wanted tea, which apparently meant I was having tea. The coworker who redid the spreadsheet so she didn't have to stay until 8. The coworker who remembered she doesn't take cream. The coworker who covered her calls the week her grandmother passed and never once made her feel like she owed him for it. Carol looked at me over the rim of her own mug. I put a name to a lot of stories before I ever put a face to one. You're taller than I pictured, for what it's worth. I felt my ears go warm in a way that had nothing to do with the kitchen's heat. I didn't realize she talked about me at all. Well, Carol said, and there was something gentle underneath the words, now you know. That was when I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow and careful, and Sophie appeared in the doorway wearing sweatpants and an old college hoodie, her hair pulled back messy, looking like a woman who had absolutely not expected to see her coworker standing in her mother's kitchen holding a mug of tea he hadn't asked for. Ethan. Her voice came out somewhere between confused and mortified. What are you doing here? You left your bag, I said, holding it up like proof I hadn't broken into her house. And the folder for tomorrow's call. I figured you'd want them before morning. Sophie's eyes moved from me to her mother, and something passed across her face that I couldn't fully translate at the time but would understand a lot better later. Panic, mostly. The specific panic of realizing 2 parts of your life had just collided without your permission. Mom, she said carefully, this is Ethan. From work. I know who he is, sweetheart, Carol said, entirely too pleased with herself. We've been having a lovely chat. Write in the comments if you've ever had a parent embarrass you faster than you thought humanly possible, because that was the exact moment I watched Sophie Bennett consider whether the house had a back door she could escape through. I should get going, I said, mostly to give her an exit from whatever this was. I just wanted to drop those off. Feel better. Wait, Carol said, before Sophie could say anything. You'll stay for dinner. I made too much anyway. Mom. Sophie's voice had a warning edge to it now. What? The men drove all the way over here after a full day of work to bring you a bag you forgot. The least we can do is feed him. I should have said no. Every reasonable part of me knew I should say no, get in my truck, and drive home to my quiet apartment where nothing was complicated and nobody was studying me like I was a puzzle they'd already half solved. Instead, I looked at Sophie, half expecting her to rescue me from the invitation, and found her looking back at me with an expression that wasn't quite a rescue. It was something closer to curiosity. Like she wanted to know what I'd say. I don't want to intrude, I said. You're not intruding, Carol said, already pulling a 3rd plate from the cabinet like the matter was settled. Sit. I sat. Dinner was chicken and rice and green beans that Carol had clearly been cooking since before Sophie even sent me the office directions, back when it was just supposed to be a quick errand. Sophie sat across from me, still pale, still recovering, but there was color creeping back into her face that I didn't think came entirely from the illness passing. Carol talked most of the meal, asking me questions about my job, my family, whether I had siblings, whether I liked living in town or if I'd grown up somewhere else. It felt less like an interrogation and more like she was filling in a picture she'd already started sketching a long time ago. At one point, Sophie kicked me under the table, not hard, just enough to get my attention, and mouth the word sorry when her mother wasn't looking. I shook my head slightly. I didn't need an apology. I was, against every prediction I would have made an hour earlier, having a genuinely good time. When dinner ended, Carol walked me to the door herself, leaving Sophie in the kitchen under the excuse of needing help with dishes she absolutely did not need help with. She's better when she's around people who don't need her to perform, Carol said quietly, once we were alone on the porch. You should know that about her. She spent a long time with someone who needed a performance. I didn't ask what she meant by that. Not yet. I just nodded, said good night, and drove home with my mind circling one sentence over and over. Sophie talks about you more than she probably realizes she does. The next morning at work, things were different in a way neither of us said out loud. Sophie was back at her desk, looking mostly recovered, and the first thing she did when I walked in was avoid eye contact so completely it became its own kind of statement. Morning, I said, setting my coffee down. Morning, she said, staring very hard at her monitor. I let it sit for about an hour before I finally leaned over the low wall between our desks. You gonna talk about it, or are we pretending your mother didn't feed me chicken and rice last night? Sophie groaned and put her forehead down on her keyboard, which triggered a string of random letters across her screen that she then had to delete. I am so sorry. She does this. She hears one detail about someone and builds an entire relationship in her head before she's even met them. So all those stories she mentioned, I said carefully, the spreadsheet thing, the cream in the coffee, all of that. You actually told her that stuff. Sophie's face went a shade darker. I tell my mother about my day. You happen to be a large part of my day. That doesn't mean anything. I didn't say it meant anything, I said, even though something in my chest disagreed with the sentence as I said it. Good, she said. Because it doesn't. We both went back to our screens after that, but the air between our desks had shifted, thin and charged in a way it hadn't been the day before. That was the first time I understood this wasn't going to stay simple, even if neither of us was ready to admit it out loud yet. Over the following weeks, something started happening that neither of us planned and neither of us fully acknowledged. I found reasons to walk past Sophie's desk that had nothing to do with actual work. She started saving me the good donut from the box someone brought in on Fridays, the one with the raspberry filling that always disappeared first if you didn't move fast. We started eating lunch together most days, not because anyone suggested it, just because it became the thing we did, the same way some people default to a particular parking spot without ever agreeing to it. Carol started texting me directly, which was a development I hadn't seen coming. Nothing strange, just recipe questions Sophie apparently forwarded my way because I'd mentioned once that I liked cooking, or invitations to Sunday dinner that I said yes to more often than any reasonable coworker relationship should have allowed. Sophie always acted embarrassed when her mother did this, but she never once told me to stop coming. The trouble started the way trouble usually starts in a small office, which is to say, quietly, then all at once. Nicole Reyes worked in accounts 2 rows over, and she had a talent for noticing things that weren't her business and turning them into things that were suddenly everyone's business. She caught me carrying Sophie's coffee back from the break room one morning, the exact way Sophie liked it, and something about that small detail apparently confirmed a theory she'd been developing. By that afternoon, half the office seemed to know Nicole's version of events before Sophie or I did. So, Nicole said, sliding up to my desk with the kind of smile that meant trouble was coming whether I wanted it or not, you and Sophie. How long has that been going on? There's no me and Sophie, I said. We're coworkers. Coworkers who have dinner at her mom's house. I felt my stomach drop slightly. Small towns. Small offices. Everything traveled. That was one dinner. I brought her a laptop bag. Sure, Nicole said, not remotely convinced. That's a very romantic gesture, Ethan. Very hallmark of you. I didn't take the bait. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with someone determined to have a theory just gave the theory more oxygen. But by the time I made it to lunch, Sophie found me in the break room with her jaw tight and her arms crossed. Did you hear what people are saying? She asked. I heard. This is exactly what I didn't want, she said, and there was real frustration in her voice now. I finally have a job where people take me seriously, and now everyone thinks I'm the girl who's dating someone at the office. That landed harder than I expected it to. Not because it wasn't fair. It was fair. She'd built something for herself here, something separate from wherever she'd come from and whatever had happened before, and the last thing she needed was an office full of people rewriting her story before she'd finished writing it herself. For what it's worth, I said, we're not dating. So they're wrong. Sophie looked at me for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. Right, she said finally. They're wrong. Neither of us sounded entirely convinced, but neither of us pushed the conversation further either. We went back to our desks and back to pretending the whole thing hadn't happened, which worked for about 4 days, right up until Derek showed up in the office parking lot. I didn't know his name yet when I first saw him, just that a man in an expensive jacket was leaning against a car that clearly cost more than mine, watching the front doors like he was waiting for someone specific. Sophie saw him before I did. I watched her whole posture change the second she stepped outside for her afternoon break, shoulders pulling up toward her ears, steps slowing like she was recalculating whether she actually needed the air after all. Sophie, he called, pushing off the car. Derek, she said, and her voice had gone flat in a way I hadn't heard from her before. What are you doing here? I heard you moved back this way. Thought I'd stop by, see how you're doing. His eyes moved to me, standing a few feet behind her, and something calculating passed across his face. This your new work friend? This is Ethan, Sophie said. Ethan, this is Derek. My ex. The word landed with weight I could feel even without knowing the whole story yet. Derek smiled at me the way men smile when they're deciding how much of a threat you are and concluding you're probably not one worth respecting. Ethan, he repeated, like he was testing the shape of my name in his mouth. Nice. You know, Sophie's a lot of work. Hope you're up for it. I'm not up for anything, I said evenly. We work together. Derek laughed, short and humorless. Right. Sure. That's what she probably told her mom, too, before you started showing up for family dinner. His eyes flicked to Sophie. Small town, sweetheart. News travels. Sophie's face went pale, then flushed with something closer to anger. How do you know about that? Your mother mentioned it, Derek said, back before she remembered she doesn't like me anymore. That answered more than the sentence probably intended to. Derek clearly still had lines into Sophie's family, or at least he wanted her to think he did, which told me plenty about the kind of relationship this had probably been. You need to leave, Sophie said, her voice steadier now. I just wanted to see you, Derek said, spreading his hands like he was the reasonable one in this conversation. Is that a crime? You wanting something has never once been about what I actually wanted, Sophie said. So yes, right now, it feels like one. Derek's jaw tightened. He glanced at me again, sizing me up one more time, then shook his head like the whole encounter had been beneath him from the start. Enjoy your work, friend, he said, and got back in his car. We stood there in silence until his taillights disappeared around the corner. Sophie let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for the better part of the entire encounter. You okay? I asked. I will be. She rubbed her arms even though it wasn't cold. He does this. Shows up when he thinks I'm settling into something good, just to remind me he still exists. Why? Because he can't stand the idea of me being fine without him, she said quietly. We dated for almost 2 years. He made me feel small enough that leaving felt like the bravest thing I'd ever done. Then he spent the year after acting like I'd abandoned him instead of the other way around. I didn't say anything right away, mostly because I didn't trust myself to say the right thing without saying too much of it. Instead, I just stood beside her until her breathing evened out, until the tension left her shoulders 1 degree at a time. For what it's worth, I said finally, you don't look small to me. Sophie glanced up at me, something soft moving across her face despite everything that had just happened. Thank you, she said. For not making a scene. Would you have wanted a scene? No, she admitted. But it's nice knowing you would have, if I'd needed one. That night, Carol called me directly, which she'd never done before without going through Sophie first. Her voice was tight in a way I hadn't heard from her. Derek came by the house today, she said, no preamble. Before he went to your office. My stomach tensed. What did he want? He wanted me to tell him where Sophie was working now. I made the mistake of mentioning it before I remembered why I don't talk to him anymore. Carol sighed, and I could hear real regret underneath it. I need you to understand something about him, Ethan. He's not dangerous in any way you can call the police about. He's dangerous in the quiet way. He makes people doubt themselves until doubting becomes a habit they can't break. I saw a little of that today, I said. Then you understand why I'm asking you this. Carol paused. Be patient with her. Whatever this is between you two, whatever it's turning into, don't rush her past what he left behind. She needs someone who lets her set the pace, not someone who pushes. I'm not planning on pushing anywhere, I said. I just want her to be okay. I know, Carol said, and I could hear the smile returning to her voice. That's exactly why I said your name the first time I opened that door, Ethan. I already knew you were the kind of man who wasn't going to push. I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up. The following weeks were quieter, at least on the surface. Derek didn't show up again, though Sophie mentioned once that he'd texted her twice, messages she didn't answer and eventually blocked without explaining the specifics to me. The office gossip cooled down the way office gossip always does once something newer comes along to replace it. Nicole moved on to speculating about someone else's love life, and Sophie and I settled back into whatever rhythm we'd built before Derek's car showed up in that parking lot. Except it wasn't quite the same rhythm anymore. Something had shifted, some layer of pretending had worn thin between us, and neither of us seemed inclined to rebuild it. It came to a head on a Friday evening after work, the two of us the last ones left in the office, finishing a report that had run late because of a system outage nobody could have predicted. Sophie leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes, exhausted in the particular way that comes from a long week finally catching up all at once. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. Why did you drive my bag over that day? You could have brought it in the next morning. Nobody would have blamed you for waiting. I thought about lying, giving her the easy version, the one about being a good coworker who didn't want her stuck without her files. But something about the exhaustion in her voice, the honesty of the question, made the easy version feel like an insult to both of us. Because I didn't want you to spend the whole night worried about something I could fix in 20 minutes, I said. And because I think I'd been looking for a reason to know more about your life outside this building for longer than I wanted to admit. Sophie went very still. Ethan. You don't have to say anything back, I said quickly. I'm not trying to make this complicated. I know what you've been through, and I know Derek left marks that don't just disappear because he's gone. I'm not in a hurry. I just wanted you to know the honest reason, instead of the polite one. She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Then she said, my mother thinks you're the kind of man worth waiting for. Your mother decided that before she'd even met me. My mother is usually right about people, Sophie said. It's one of the most annoying things about her. So what do you think? I asked. Sophie stood up from her desk, walked around to where I was sitting, and for a second, I thought she was about to say something careful and measured, the kind of answer that kept both of us safely on the coworker side of the line we'd been circling for weeks. Instead, she reached down and took my hand, simple, deliberate, no hesitation in it at all. I think, she said, that I've spent a long time being careful because the last person I trusted made carefulness feel necessary. And I think you're the first person since him who's made me forget to be careful, and not regret it after. I stood up slowly, still holding her hand. That's a big thing to say to your coworker. You're not just my coworker, Sophie said. You haven't been for a while. I think we both know that. So what are we, then? She smiled, the real one, the one that showed up rarely and always meant something when it did. Ask my mother. She already picked a name for it before either of us did. I laughed, and something in my chest that had been tight for weeks finally loosened. Fair enough, I said. Then let's make it official before she starts planning the wedding. Sophie's eyes went wide, half laughing, half scandalized. She would absolutely do that. I believe you. That night, I drove her home, and this time when Carol opened the door, she didn't say my name like a question or a hopeful theory. She said it like a fact already settled, already true, the way you greet someone who belongs somewhere. Ethan, she said, smiling wide enough that I understood immediately she already knew exactly what had happened before either of us said a word. Dinner's almost ready. Sit down. Both of you. Sophie squeezed my hand once before letting go to help her mother in the kitchen, and I stood in that same doorway where all of it had started, thinking about how strange it was that a forgotten laptop bag and a mother who trusted her instincts more than she trusted formal introductions had somehow rearranged the entire shape of my life. 6 months later, Derek stopped texting entirely, the last of his noise finally fading into background static neither of us thought about anymore. Nicole moved to a different department and found someone else's business to occupy her curiosity. Sophie got promoted to lead a small team of her own, and the first person she told, before her mother, before anyone else, was me, standing in the break room with 2 cups of coffee, hers with cream, no sugar. A year after that, I proposed to her in Carol's backyard, the same porch where I'd first stood holding a bag that wasn't mine, not sure what I was walking into. Carol cried before Sophie even finished saying yes, which surprised nobody, least of all me. "I told you," Carol whispered to me later that night, squeezing my arm with a satisfaction she'd clearly been saving up for over a year. I knew the second I opened that door. "You didn't know anything," I said, laughing. "You just decided I was going to be family and refused to consider any other outcome." "Same thing," Carol said, unbothered. "Mothers know. You'll understand that someday, when you're standing on the other side of a door, saying somebody's name before they've even told you who they are." I think about that a lot now, the strange, quiet accident of it. How I wasn't her boyfriend that day. I was just her coworker, carrying a bag she'd forgotten, doing the ordinary decent thing because it seemed like the obvious thing to do. And somehow, a woman I'd never met opened a door, said my name like she already knew exactly who I was going to become, and turned out to be right about all of it. Sometimes the people who see us clearest aren't the ones we're trying to impress. Sometimes it's a mother standing in a doorway, recognizing something in a stranger's face before the stranger has recognized it in himself. Have you ever had someone's parent see something in you before you saw it yourself? And would you have knocked on that door, or turned around and driven home the second things started feeling complicated? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.